What's up, YouTube? This is Corey from Bitfire. I have a short video today, which is a continuation from yesterday's devlog video. And I wanted to go over some code that we wrote yesterday and just talk a little bit about my thinking and how we can improve the code and just patterns to use when you're writing software. This is kind of like functional style, right? So if you remember yesterday, what we were trying to do was take a list of patterns, right? File patterns like these right here. These are lists to potential locations for Apache or Nginx configuration files. And we want to convert that into a list of files that actually exist on the computer, right? So one way we could do that is we could take the list of all these patterns and we could for each over all of them. And then for each individual pattern, we could run the glob function and get the list of files back. And then for each one of those files, we can append it to our list of files, or you could maybe do an array merge here. And then at the end, we're going to return all of our files, right? This is just very and you remember yesterday, the code that we wrote looked like this, pattern to list to. And instead of using these two for loops, we used an array reduce method. And we passed in the patterns as the initial array, and then we reduced by reducing then the glob, right, of those files, right? And glob, if you're not familiar, basically just expands this star, right? It's what expands file like substitutions at the command line, right? Like stars, question marks, things like that. So this is great, right? We're not using any for loops. We're just using pure functions. But I thought when I took a look at this, and I said, you know what? This really, what are we really doing here? There's really only two things we're doing. We're taking this array of patterns and we're taking a glob function. All the rest of this is boilerplate. That made me think that really what we need is kind of like not pattern, like something like this, right? Recursive reduce, because what we want to do is we want to just not just iterate over the first list, but then we want to run a function on that and then reduce that data. So recursive, and maybe rather than calling this recursive reduce, let's call this recursive append, recursive recursive appending, reduction. Naming things has got to be one of the hardest problems in computer science. Caching, invalidating cache, and naming things are the two hardest problems in computer science. Let's just go ahead and leave it as recursive reduce. And all we're going to do is pass in that function to call and the initial list of patterns. This right here looks very clean, right? And this is, once we have this recursive reduce function working well, we can use it anywhere in our code base. Just pass it the function that we want to reduce these on, and the function we want to reduce these by. And once this function right here is well tested, we don't have to copy and paste all of this code, right? So the problem with writing code like this is that someone might come in here and maybe, all files, found equals true. Someone could come in here and edit this, change it later. You've got two different loops. Maybe someone accidentally does, this, right? And now we have variable shadowing. And 9 times out of 10, there's not going to be any issues there, but occasionally, you can have bugs creep in. When we do it this way, okay, this is very clean. It's very difficult to introduce bugs. All we're doing is passing in a single function, which takes a single parameter and returns an output of an array, which we want to keep appending to each other, right? So basically, we're just taking these, passing them to this, and taking whatever the results of that are, and appending it into an array. So what might that function look like? Well, it's going to look really similar to this. In fact, I've already gone up here and created this recursive reduce function. So it takes a callable and it takes the initial list, and all I did was replace this function with a variable function name and this list right here. And then we also had to create a capture group for our function, because otherwise it wouldn't be accessible to this inner function right here. So that's the main point I wanted to drive home, is just kind of like different ways to solve problems, to write cleaner code that has fewer bugs, right? And it's more easily testable. This is also very unit testable, right? We can come over here to our unit tests, and it's very easy to add tests. It's also very easy for us to add test cases for this recursive reduce function, right? And we can test with a couple different input functions, a couple different lists. We can test adding null lists, and then we can be sure that this recursive reduce function works in all scenarios. And then when we use it down here, we know we're not going to have any problems with it, right? And that's code we only have to test once. So that's just an idea. I'm going to go ahead and get started on another video for you guys about taking this code right here that we wrote yesterday to process the access lines, and how we cleaned it up from this, right? This section of code, which is not too bad. It's, what do we got here? Maybe 20 lines of code, a little more, into this, right? And this is a little difficult to read. It's not obvious what's going on here or why you would even care about it. But when we come down here and we read this, we make this is much easier to read. We can see data, if we have a valid HTTP code, then we split on the request URL, then we map the access line to a server array, and then we call process request. So anyways, I'm gonna get started on another video. I'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers.